I love Chikorita. Like, I love Chikorita. I have a tattoo of Chikorita. I have a full team of shiny Chikoritas. My secondary channel is called Cecily Loves Chikorita. Go subscribe. And when she was revealed as one of the starters in the upcoming Pokemon Legends EA, this was my reaction. We are catching Pokemon. Chikorita! Chikorita! Todo tayo, Chikorita! Tapping! What the f***? Let's go! Mega Chikorita! Let Mega Meganium! So yeah, Pokemon Day was huge for me, and I'm extremely hyped for Pokemon Legends EA. I have been wanting to have a Pokemon adventure in a huge city, bustling with life, colorful characters, side quests, small stories, and Pokemon living with us since forever, really. And I went online to celebrate and talk to other Pokemon fans about the incredible trailers we just saw. And then I made the mistake of logging into the mental health website, and I was welcomed by...
Totodile, great. Tepig, amazing. But Chikorita? Chikorita, are you kidding me?
And I was just confused to see so much hate directed specifically at Chikorita. Like, yes, it's always like this. Some people will dislike some Pokemon, and you have your usual haters. People saying that everything after Gen 1 is trash, people thinking that Garbodor existing is an argument, but this was an unusually strong amount of hate. The type that isn't really usual for Pokemon. It reminded me of something that I couldn't quite identify yet. And people were joking about Chikorita only having 7 fans, but I can assure you, my streams here trying to get Bayleaf to Master Ball rank bring much more than 7 people. Something weird was in the air. This wasn't usual slander, this was harsher. Something was calling me for some research in old Nintendo interviews and a 30-minute long essay. And then I saw this message, and it connected to synapses in my brain. This is certainly an interesting way of looking at it. Could the explanation for this unwarranted hate for one of my favorite Pokemon be rooted in something that the gaming community knows far too well? Could it just be hating things that are made for girls? Wait, before you click out of the video, press the dislike button and leave a very impolite comment, I would just like to call your attention here to the title of this video. Do you see it? It's a question mark. Am I saying that it's definitely surely rooted in misogyny? No, I'm not. Am I saying that everyone who dislikes Chikorita hates women? No. Am I saying that you are legally obliged to like the same Pokemon as I do? No. And I swear, anything you are thinking about commenting, I will talk about in this video. What I really want to try to do here and understand better is if this disproportionate hate, at least from some people, might have its roots somewhere else other than just personal taste. But the truth is, I don't know. You don't know. By the end of this video, odds are, we both won't know for sure, dear stranger online. But it's an interesting question, right? It can definitely get us started on a path to learn more about the series, about gaming history, about marketing, and about, well, sexism. And isn't it nice to ask questions, to be curious, to investigate stuff? This here is just an essay, a rehearsal of an idea, and I'm not here to spit any golden nuggets of truth. I'm here to entertain a possibility. And try to understand why some people might think that my poor leaf Pokemon is being the victim of misogynist attacks. Instead of saying who's right and who's not and start calling each other names, I just want to do something a bit cooler. Something that people on the internet very rarely do. I want to try to understand why people might think the way they do. We are all products of culture, right? A lot of things have happened in Game Freak around the world since Chikorita was first presented in 1999. Not only that, many things have happened before that led to her creation in the first place. Context is key, and Chikorita has been receiving a lot of hate since, well, 1999 from the Pokémon community. A community that was much different then than it is now, that had some practices and some jokes and even a demographic that is completely unimaginable when you look at it today. What I'm trying to say is that to understand Chikorita hate, I think we need to look first at weird Nintendo commercials from the 90s.
Plumbers, rabbits, mazes, monkeys, demons, dragons, evil, jungles, puzzles, barrels, bomb.
Stick it in your pocket.
The Nintendo and Sega neck-to-neck competition was probably the defining aspect of the gaming industry in the years leading up to Pokemon's creation. In order to compete against a blue hedgehog that's gotta go fast, Nintendo needed to up their game. They pivoted from their family-oriented marketing to some more aggressive strategies by launching the Play It Loud campaign. Rad, cool, skateboard, Charlie Brown Jr. This campaign was aimed at Nintendo's core audience, which was young boys. And this led up to Dear Stranger Online. Well, maybe it's better if I just show you some ads.
Something's gone wrong in the happy-go-lucky world of Nintendo.
But why boys? Like, why are video games targeted at boys specifically? Does that make any sense? Well, here's the deal. According to a nice video I watched by Adam Conover, at the beginning of the 80s with the great video game crash and everything, Nintendo decided that they would stop selling in the technology section of your local Costco and start selling in the toys department instead. It does actually make a lot of sense, Nintendo being originally a toy company, and well, toys are probably the most aggressively gendered section of any store on the planet. Instead of marketing to families, they had to pick one gender out of only two, which is too few, I think. And since it's easier to sell boy stuff to girls rather than selling girl stuff to boys, they chose the blue lane. 20 years later, in the early 2000s, marketing and culture had completely changed and solidified the pure nugget of truth that gaming is for boys. I have girlfriends that only got into video games in their 20s because their parents would never buy them a console as a kid. It wasn't for them. It was a boy thing like cars, sports, and having a crush on Wolf Glick. Gaming had become a majorly masculine environment, both offline and in the ever-growing online communities that were forming. And I'm not sure if you, Dear Stranger Online, were around back then, but let me tell you something. In the 2000s, anything that was made for girls was mocked relentlessly, specifically 13-year-old girls. The Twilight books were constantly made fun of all the time, anywhere you looked at in 2010. YouTubers made entire careers out of it. And K-pop and tween Justin Bieber, who only started getting more respect after directing his sound to a male audience. They were constantly harassed in blogs and comedy shows and Twitter. In the meanwhile, movies that were instead aimed at 13-year-old boys, like Transformers, had some jokes about too many explosions here and there, but never saw a glimpse of the hate that things like Twilight had. Whether it's young adult novels, super hulock, or fanfiction, anything that was made with young girls in mind would suffer backlash or mockery in online and specifically gaming spaces. Even though teenage girls are always literally in the vanguard that dictates where the future of pop culture is headed to, they will always be bullied just for liking stuff. That's also when memes like the "there are no girls on the internet" showed up, trying to enforce that women could never be actually welcomed in nerdy online spaces. If they tried to join, they would be victim of abuse and misogyny, as is the case with the "make me a sandwich" meme that was quite popular in the 2000s. And still today, mainstream gaming spaces continue to be quite aggressive towards women, as any woman who has ever been in a gaming voice chat can tell you. Alongside the misogynistic fiasco that was Gamergate and the woke games list that basically call any game with a female protagonist woke, I think we can all agree, being a girl and liking video games is hard. But let me get back to the 2000s. Gaming was heavily marketed at boys. It was an overwhelmingly male-dominated space. And this was the case even with Nintendo games in the USA, in very, very weird ways. As fellow content creator Randy Moon goes over in their video, why were video game ads so weird?
Therefore, they decided to go with the by then well-proven method of advertising the handheld to a primarily male, college-aged audience. And this is evident in just how sexual a lot of the ads were. Exhibit A.
Touch me.
Wow, very suggestive and hot. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in the meeting where they came up with that one.
But do you know what would happen when something that was initially marketed at boys turned out to have some aspects that were a little bit more girl-friendly? Exactly what happened to Jennifer's Body in 2007, a horror movie written by the incredible Diablo Cody that was marketed as a "wow, Megan Fox is so hot" movie, but it was actually a feminist tale of body ownership and female friendship aimed at young women. It was review-bombed, universally hated, and almost ended Diablo Cody's career. This is a video about Chikorita, I know, but this was me setting the stage, dear stranger online, painting the picture of the cultural background around gaming and around Pokémon in the United States at the turn of the millennium. I'm trying to say that, mostly in the early 2000s, having something made for girls in the middle of your boy product would result in hate, bullying, shames, jokes, you name it. It happened to Koha and it happened to Ellie. And yes, Pokémon was marketed mainly at boys back then. If you look at early Pokémon commercials, only boys would appear in them. But the Nintendo of America marketing team is not Game Freak. Oh no, back in Japan, the Pokémon Company had other ideas of where this series was heading to. And before Gen 2 came out, this was something that showed mainly in the anime. I have said this in some videos before, but I cannot stress enough how important the gender neutrality of the Pokémon anime was in the 90s. In a context where most animes would show buff guys with spiky hair fighting or sword-wielding knights saving the princess, Pokémon was really ahead of its time by showing girls, feminine girls or tomboys with desires, aspirations of their own, girls who, despite what they looked like, were incredibly skilled trainers and fully fledged characters. I would argue, even more importantly than that, femininity was never mocked in the Pokémon anime. It was okay to have feminine-coded interests, it was celebrated even. Femininity was embraced, openly discussed by Misty, Erika, Jessie, and Brock and James. And I mean, it's the 90s, some things would be off, sure, but it was miles ahead of almost everything for kids on TV back then, and this was incredibly important to many girls growing up back then, and they made sure to comment about it in a bunch of my videos before. The first Pokémon games were stitched together with duct tape and a dream, but for the sequel you can really feel that Game Freak wanted to expand, and that expansion would include everyone. Chikorita debuted in the same generation that girls could play as themselves on screen, and I cannot stress how important the addition of Chris was that early into the series. The protagonist in Pokémon is almost always a self-insert, and having girls being able to play with someone closer to themselves was really important for the game staying as popular as it did. But not only Chris, creature design in Pokémon was also starting to head in new directions. Lead designer Ken Sugimori has said before in interviews that his approach for creating Pokémon was always closer to kaiju rather than kawaii. This interview here was given shortly after the Gold and Silver releases. With Pokémon, it was more that I wanted to create kaiju who could fight on your side as an ally, in a more cartoonish, exaggerated style. As I drew more and more of them, I started to figure out how to give them more interesting expressions, or to make them look dopey or disgusting. I wasn't the only person creating Pokémon, there were 5 or 6 other designers working on them too. As you can imagine, each designer had a certain style or type of Pokémon that was their specialty. One of them was great at making cute Pokémon, another one was all about the weird Pokémon, and so forth. If you allow me to read a little bit between the lines here, when he talks about a designer that has cuteness as their specialty, Atsuko Nishida comes to mind. When Sugimori saw he had difficulties in creating cute Pokémon, he called Nishida to help, and she ended up creating the most iconic Gen 1 designs, such as Pikachu, the full starter trio, and Charizard. I looked very hard, but I couldn't find out if she was involved in the creation of the Generation 2 starter trio, but having created Charmander, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle, it's hard to think that she wasn't a major voice for the sequel. I did find this interview on Dr. Lava's blog, which is the most incredible source for English language Game Freak interviews online. In this one, Nishida talks about the creation of Sylveon and Espeon, and I think this gives great insight into the creative process behind Gen 2. Ms. Nishida, do you feel like there's an evolution that really went in a new direction? Of course, each Pokémon is influenced by the region and configuration of the game they're created for, but as far as innovation, I would say Sylveon. We really wanted to emphasize its fairy theme. as far as its figure, were they all kind of girly like the Sylveon we have now? And Nishida says, yeah, they were all the same style since it's a fairy type. Speaking of being feminine, Espeon also has that same kind of vibe. It's very slim and even has hips, which was quite unique for its time. I guess in trying to make it look mysterious, it ended up looking feminine. I think it's really interesting to hear Atsuko Nishida say that ending up with a feminine design was unique for its time. Gen 2. It shows that this was kind of uncharted territory, right? This wasn't a big concern for Pokemon in Gen 1, but Gen 2? Now we want to actively start to create some creatures for the girls to use, for the people who would choose Chris as their character. With Gen 2, Game Freak wanted girls to better see themselves in their games and have their own Pokemon adventures. And of course, if you want to have girls playing, you have to make at least one of the starters one that they might identify more with. And yes, we had our Clefairies and Chanseys before, but with Chikorita, it's a bit different. She's being offered to you, you can't avoid her. And to choose a starter Pokemon is to actively reject the other two, and that makes it a more special encounter than if you randomly ran into it in a cave. There's a tiny emotional bond, a small moment that you may have considered bringing Chikorita alongside you. And how dare they imply that I would ever consider choosing this girly pair? And if you, as a boy, did consider Chikorita, liked Chikorita, or chose Chikorita, you would also be mocked and judged and suffer the same backlash that Twilight did. In this male-dominated environment, a boy was never allowed to validate that something marketed for girls could actually be good. For a boy, everything that was more female-oriented was forbidden and out of reach. So you had to double down. You had to prove you would never ever choose it. Because Chikorita sucks. It's the worst starter of all time. And in the comment section below, there will be a lot of people writing that what I'm trying to imply is silly. That Chikorita could never be a victim of misogyny because in the games, they have 80% chance of being male, like LOL. And to that I say, well, gender is not really about an arbitrary symbol they put next to your name. Gender is about how you are perceived by others. Not only, but also. The Pokemon anime has also depicted Ash's Chikorita with a very feminine-coded personality, very attached and emotional, which also builds the public image of the Pokemon. And if that's not good enough of an explanation for you, well, I can tell you that in international dubs, every single starter has a masculine article before their name. El Bulbasaur, Cyndaquil. Chikorita was the first starter ever, and maybe the last one, to have a feminine article used before their name. La Chikorita. But how do I explain the fact that a lot of feminine-looking Pokemon are actually fan favorites, such as Gardevoir and Lopunny? But I'm not really talking about feminine Pokemon. I'm talking about Pokemon that are designed for girls to identify with, and there's a difference there, right? You get it. You see that there are different reasons why someone, specifically a teenage boy, might like the femininity in Gardevoir but be repulsed by the femininity in Chikorita. You understand that we're talking about different kinds of gazes, right? I know you have more things you want to say. I see you typing in the comment section. You are going to say that I'm reading too much into it, that the reason why more people dislike Chikorita than usual is because of bad stats and mediocre performance against Johto trainers, and yes, let's get into that. I will be going by the article written by Vida de Treinador, fellow Brazilian creator, where they list some of these reasons. So yes, Chikorita's typing in Johto is unfortunate. She is weak against Faulkner and Bugsy, weak against many of the poison types brought by Team Rocket. Her move pool in Gold and Silver is really limited, and Wolf Glick has named Meganium the worst starter ever in competitive VGC. But I mean, really? Is that what we take into account when choosing a Pokemon? Is that what a kid takes into account when liking a starter? Competitive viability and type balancing in their region? Because I myself never Googled that before choosing a starter. I have always chosen the Pokemon I have identified the most with, that I thought had a cooler or cuter design. And also, have you played Gold and Silver recently? Every single Pokemon has a horrible move pool in those games. Speaking of it, do Faulkner and Bugsy even have stab moves in Gen 2? Honestly, if your Chikorita is struggling against a Pidgey and a Kakuna, I personally think that might be a skill issue. I actually think it is miles easier to solo Faulkner with a Chikorita than to solo Brock with a Charmander. Charmander is weak against the first two counter gyms, and that was never an issue. Greninja usage in VGC in 2015 was 1%. That never stopped them from being fan favorites, and they never received an inch of the backlash Chikorita has received. You know which other starters were victims of backlash when they were released? Delphox, who has its design heavily inspired by medieval witches and mages. Primarina, back when Sun and Moon were released, had an intense negative reaction to it. Poplio was already disliked, but evolving into a mermaid? The Pokémon community couldn't deal with that. Are you seeing a pattern here? Something I really remember, and I wish I could find more material from 2014 to show, is how much of an intense backlash the introduction of the fairy type was. People said it would ruin the game, completely break the balance of the type charts, and that it didn't make any sense that the all-powerful, masculine, mighty dragons were all of a sudden weak to Jigglypuff. And fellow queer content creator Fawn said something really interesting about fairy types in their video that also discusses Chikorita hate, which is amazing and definitely a companion piece to this one, and you should watch after.
Attributing a type to the aesthetic helps to validate it in the space, in the community, and with the fans. The developers said, yes, there's girly pop Pokemon, and they're quite strong.
And I completely agree with that. Making the fairy type as strong competitively as Game Freak has chosen to means not only to validate femininity in Pokemon, it is to say there is power in femininity, enough to take down legends and dragons, and I think that's awesome. And to remind you, dear stranger online, I'm not trying to say that something is definitely sexism or not, or that one thing is 100% this or that. I'm rehearsing. I'm entertaining an idea, and these are things that have happened over the last 20 years. I'm not saying that only feminine additions to the Pokemon franchise are hated. There has been different types of starters backlash before, like the ever-present Fire Fighting Bipedal Final Evolution, but it's interesting to look for patterns, right? Why Chikorita still receives such a disproportionate amount of hate? Does it have anything to do to things that have happened before? Not only in Pokemon, but in all culture that surrounds it? The only person that can come up with a conclusion is you. But what I would argue is that gaming has changed. The internet has changed, and the way that Pokemon is marketed has definitely changed. We've been through a pandemic, a market crash, Pokemon Go happened. Culture today is really different from culture in 1999. The demographic of the Pokemon community online is also wildly different from what it was in 1999. And the way women and gender non-conforming people have claimed spaces in online community for themselves makes it so that the configuration is very different today than it was in 1999. Today we can have Pokemon like Tinkaton become instant fan favorites, or Meowscarada be one of the most celebrated starters. Pokemon that are, yes, designed for girls instead of just feminine Pokemon designed for a male gaze, because the Pokemon community has become much more inclusive and welcoming and diverse than it was in 1999. But I think memory persists, right? Time is a funny thing. You might have a negative reaction to something 20 years later because, in the past, you were scared of being judged by your friends for picking the girly starter. And I think that's something important for us to talk about, not just ridicule as a crazy idea, and that's why I'm making this video. I think that you can have a myriad of reasons for why you dislike Chikorita. Either because you had a hard time using her in Johto, or because you didn't like its moves, or simply and purely because you don't vibe with the design, and that's fine. But I think that for a few people there might be some roots in an old, gamer, misogynistic culture from the 2000s that complains about female characters' designs, that complains about female characters' protagonists, and we see that in our daily lives using the internet. We know these people exist, and I don't think it's a stretch to think that this also applies to a little grass starter. And also, something that I think is really important for this video is that I always try to remind people, not everything is made for you. Not everything is made for me. Really, and that's fine. I think algorithms showing us curated posts made by people we don't follow, or videos from YouTubers we never heard of, that might make us forget that the people who made these things maybe didn't make it specifically for us. Maybe I'm just not the audience for that. And that's fine. When Game Freak chooses a set of starters, they are not choosing them to please me, Cecily. They might be choosing them to please Gen 1 fans, or Unova fans, or young teenage girls, or the developers themselves. We need to always remember, not everything that exists on the internet is tailor-made for me, just because it showed up in my timeline. And something else that I learned from this channel is that it is true. Every single Pokemon is someone's favorite. That's not a hyperbole. It's not worth to dunk on any Pokemon at all, because there will always be someone in the comments who loves them, or has a special story with them. Even Pokemon like Veluza sniping me down at Lightspeed in Casseroya Lake. There will be someone who loves them. In the end, it's just personal taste. And if it's not for me, then it's certainly for someone else. A lot has changed in this community since Chikorita was introduced, and I really hope she gets an incredible upgrade in Pokemon Legends EA. Whether it's access to Rage Powder, a nice regional form, or a broken Mega Evolution, because this little pair is really special to me. I really hope, as Fawn has said, that the Fairy type comes in to upgrade this Pokemon that has for way too long held the title of most hated starter, for reasons I think are super unfair. And I think that's why the diversity of designs in Pokemon is so amazing. Because for a small girl that will be given Chikorita as a choice for the first time in Legends EA, seeing that this Leaf Pokemon, a Pokemon that was designed with her in mind, can also be powerful, can be a healer, can be a tank, and can be really, really, really fun to play with, is what Pokemon is all about. Because Pokemon is for girls. Pokemon is for gender non-conforming people. Pokemon is for everyone.